Okay, so let's repeat that. Ontology is fairly simple because it just requires an introspective act of distinction and to notice the processes in the mind that are leading and structuring all the other processes. They're doing all the sense making, the metaphysical and ontological and epistemological and phenomenological sense making. Right? So once that concept that distinguishes the internal state is held stably, and then once its analog is discerned intuitively and then located in scripture in a structure that reveals a more complex relationship because it's bringing association and context to that intuitive connection, uh, you can start mapping on analogicity to ontology. Right? And once you map on analogicity to ontology, you can then start thinking about the dynamic relationships between ontological nodes, bringing out the metaphysics of ontology itself, which is about what? Rational phenomenology, not just mere phenomenology, but rational phenomenology, which starts at the top itself, ontology itself. What does it mean to be a rational being, reasoning about the nature of reality and self and so on? Okay, so you've now connected ontology and analogicity, and now you're starting to discover the dynamics between two nodes of ontology, sometimes on the same level, sometimes on different levels. All right, once you're in that space, you've now understood the reality of the Quran. And you can just start discovering it and discovering nature and discovering yourself into a full manifest relationship with the absolute mind. And as you're understanding that, you're going to need some contrast. So you need to understand why a theory of mind did not emerge in the traditionalist space, and therefore what is it then? If it isn't fundamentally about what the Quran is about, what is it about? And that's the whole process of understanding the 18th wall, the Babylonian Sumerian dynamic, and how historical indicators emerge, and how all of this knowledge converges on indicators, sometimes which are subtle and kind of distorted because it's not about word match, it's about theory match. And that's a perfect strategy to continue hiding yourself from people who are obsessed with exact definitions of exact words. So yeah, and you keep building up the contrast. The next contrast is the humanistic order itself and the development of mind independent of a theory of mind, and a proper theory of mind that fronts all knowledge. And that tells you what the murky eye is. So then you now have a map of everything, right? And تفصيلا لكل شيء, an explanation of absolutely every single thing that you could possibly come across is established by understanding the ontological, the analogical indicators of the Quran and how they relate to phenomenology, meaning your direct experience as a rational subject, right? And how that structures history and all the principles of the metaphysics of inversion, separation, negativity, and everything else that forces the structure of contingent minds into negative ends against a compromise that's trying to pull it towards the center, because the ideal can only be achieved by the rational, willing individual against the sociological and historical forces. That's it. You've understood the whole Quran if you've understood these things. Now, once you've understood these things, you understand now we have to move as rational agents in the world to build the kinds of institutions that can manifest that reality, and that is the most difficult job possible, but it's well worth doing. But you can't do it if you don't understand the principle of la misas, the untouchability of the tradition as a dynamic object to relate to. It's necessary. It has to be there. It has a carrying function. All the analogies are clear. Right? And now we have to turn to the world as rational agents, not as irrational agents, which means we cannot have the kinds of interactions with the mother that are assumed under traditionalism and therefore drag that mind decade after decade, painstakingly, day after day, into that quasi-traditionalist space where everything feels hopeless.